The snow hasn't even stopped falling from the last storm. And right now, the models are already painting a picture of something new developing on the horizon. And what makes this particular setup worth talking about today, what makes this one potentially more than just a quick hit of snow, is the way the atmospheric pattern is lining itself up. Because when you step back and look at what's driving this next round, it becomes clear that this isn't just a random clipper system breezing through. There's real energy behind this. There's a real question forming here. How bad could this actually get? Let's break it all down. Before we get into the details, just take a moment to appreciate where we are in the pattern right now. We just came out of a historically significant nor'easter that buried portions of the Northeast under 2 to 3 feet of snow in some places. You would think, okay, we're done for a while, right? The atmosphere needs time to reset. That would be the logical assumption. But the atmosphere doesn't care about what's logical. And right now, the teleconnection pattern, the large-scale atmospheric behavior that dictates what happens weeks in advance, is still favoring active storm development along the eastern seaboard and across the interior of the country. So that brings us to what we are watching right now. There is a trough, a dip in the jet stream, that is in the process of digging into the central part of the country. And whenever that happens, whenever you get that prolonged southward dip in the jet stream, you create the conditions necessary for cold air to pour in from Canada, for moisture to get drawn up from the Gulf of Mexico, and for storm systems to rapidly organize and intensify. The question right now isn't whether another round of significant winter weather is possible. The models are already fairly consistent on that. The question is exactly where the heaviest impacts are going to land and how intense this system is going to become as it organizes. This is where the scenario analysis gets interesting. Let's start with what the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts model is suggesting. If you follow weather at all, well, you know the European model has earned a reputation for being one of the more reliable tools when it comes to mid-range forecasting, meaning the 3 to 7 day window. And right now, the European model is indicating that a surface low-pressure system is going to develop somewhere over the Central Plains, track northeast, and bring a shield of heavy snow into the interior Northeast and potentially the mid-Atlantic region over the next several days. The timing matters here. The system is being fueled by a combination of a Pacific jet stream disturbance working its way across the continent and a pool of extremely cold air that is already in place across the northern tier of the country after the last storm. Cold air in place, moisture incoming, and a jet stream that's primed to create lift. Those are the ingredients. That's the setup. Now, the American Global Forecast System model has been a little more aggressive than the European model in terms of snowfall totals. And that's worth noting, but also worth being cautious about. The Global Forecast System has been known to get excited about storms in the long range and then back off as we get closer to the event. So rather than anchoring to one specific snowfall number right now, what matters more is that we understand the scenario range, the low end, the high end, and what the most likely outcome looks like based on everything the models are collectively telling us. On the low end of the scenario spectrum, we're looking at a system that comes in, drops a general 3 to 6 inches of snow across the interior Northeast, clips New England with moderate accumulations, and then exits relatively quickly before it has a chance to really wind up. That's the benign scenario. That's the one where people look out the window Monday morning and say, "La, that wasn't so bad." Under this scenario, travel gets disrupted for a day. Snow removal crews are busy, but we're not talking about historic impacts. On the high end of the scenario spectrum, and this is where things get considerably more concerning, the surface low takes a slightly more coastal track. The storm undergoes more rapid intensification than the models are currently showing. And you end up with snowfall rates that could reach 1 to 2 inches per hour for extended periods across portions of New Jersey, southern New England, Long Island, and the New York City metropolitan area. Under this scenario, we're talking about storm totals that could approach 10 to 14 inches in the highest impact areas. That's not a small deal, especially coming on top of the snowpack that is already sitting on the ground from the last event. Roads that were just barely getting cleared out could become completely impassable again. And the weight of new, heavy snow on top of already stressed infrastructure, trees, power lines, rooftops, becomes a compounding problem. The most likely scenario, given what the model suite is showing right now, lands somewhere in between those two extremes. Something in the 6 to 10 inch range for the hardest hit areas seems plausible based on current data, but confidence remains lower than we'd like at this stage. And that matters. That uncertainty matters. Because the difference between 6 inches and 14 inches is not just a matter of how much shoveling you have to do. It's the difference between a manageable situation and a situation that overwhelms infrastructure and creates dangerous travel conditions for an extended period. Let's talk about wind for a moment, because I think this element isn't getting enough attention in the early conversations about this storm. One of the more concerning aspects of this setup, particularly under the higher-end scenarios, is the wind shear profile. The jet stream is going to be positioned in a way that could allow for fairly strong winds at the surface as this storm organizes and pulls in cold air from the north. We could be looking at sustained winds of 20 to 30 miles per hour, and with gusts potentially exceeding 40 miles per hour in coastal areas during the height of the storm. What does that mean practically? It means visibility could drop dramatically, even if the snowfall rate itself isn't all that extreme. Blowing and drifting snow, even at relatively modest accumulation totals, can create near whiteout conditions on open roadways and in exposed areas. So even the lower-end snowfall scenarios come packaged with a wind threat that needs to be taken seriously. And if we're in the higher-end scenario, if this system takes a coastal track and really organizes, those wind gusts push higher into the 50-plus mile-per-hour range along the immediate coast. At that point, you're talking about a storm that looks and feels very different from a simple snowstorm. Drifts of several feet, power outages, coastal flooding potential during high tide cycles, the kind of storm that disrupts life for multiple days, not just one. Now, something worth paying particular attention to right now is the temperature gradient ahead of this system. One of the things that determines whether a storm produces rain, a rain-to-snow changeover, or all snow from the start, is how cold the air column is, and specifically, how cold the air is at the surface and in the lower atmosphere. Right now, following the last major storm, there is a substantial pool of cold air sitting across the interior Northeast and New England. That cold air reservoir hasn't fully retreated. It's still there. And depending on how quickly the next storm system arrives, that cold air could remain in place long enough to set up a scenario where precipitation falls as snow from the very beginning across a large portion of the region. For areas like Philadelphia, it's less clear. The rain-snow line is always one of the trickiest things to pin down with any confidence. Oh, and Philadelphia sits right in that zone where the difference of 50 miles in the storm track can be the difference between a major snowstorm and a miserable cold rain event. That's a question that won't be answerable with confidence until we're roughly 48 to 72 hours out from the start of the storm. Right now, the Philadelphia forecast sits somewhere in a zone of real uncertainty. The data suggests the possibility of a snow event, but the rain-to-snow changeover timing is critical, and that's something to watch closely over the next day or two. For the New York City area, confidence is somewhat higher that snow will be the primary precipitation type for most of the event, given the cold air in place. But even there, a slight southward wobble in the storm track could introduce some sleet or freezing rain into the mix, particularly during the early stages of the event. And a slight northward wobble could bring heavier snow farther inland into areas like Allentown, Scranton, and the Hudson Valley. The point is, small differences in storm track create very big differences in what you experience on the ground. And that's not a cop-out, that's just the physics of the situation. Let's talk about something that often gets overlooked in these discussions, which is the timing. The current model consensus is pointing toward the heaviest precipitation arriving during a window that would likely impact the morning or afternoon commute. That's a particularly problematic timing scenario if it holds, because it puts the worst of the storm right during the period when the most people are on the roads. If you've been through one of these storms before, you know how quickly conditions can deteriorate. 1 hour you're looking at light snow, and 90 minutes later, the roads are completely covered and you're doing 15 miles per hour on the highway. The timing of when this storm peaks is going to be one of the most important pieces of information to track as we get into the 48-hour window before the event begins. What are the models showing in terms of which areas are at the highest risk of significant impacts right now? Looking at the current data, in the area that appears to have the highest probability of seeing the most significant snowfall, totals runs roughly from southern Connecticut, across Long Island, through coastal New Jersey, and into southeastern New England, including the Providence, Rhode Island area, and southeastern Massachusetts. Boston is also worth watching closely. Following the last storm, the city took a substantial hit. And another round of meaningful snowfall could push already stressed snow removal operations beyond capacity. Storm drains that were never fully cleared could back up. The weight of repeated snow events on commercial and residential rooftops is a legitimate structural concern at this point in the season. For the mid-Atlantic, Washington, the District of Columbia area, and Richmond, Virginia, the picture looks considerably less dramatic. Those areas are likely to sit on the southern fringe of the precipitation shield, and even if they do get some snow, the totals are likely to remain in the 1 to 4 inch range under most scenarios. That said, in areas where the ground is already frozen, and where snowplow resources have been stretched by previous events, even a couple of inches can create meaningful travel disruption. Here's what the pattern tells us over the longer term. And this might be the most important thing to take away from this entire discussion. the atmospheric pattern that has been driving all of this active winter weather. The blocking pattern over the North Atlantic, the consistent cold air intrusions from Canada, the active jet stream. That pattern has not fundamentally changed. We are not looking at a pattern transition in the near term. The models in the extended range continue to suggest that the active, stormy pattern across the eastern half of the country is going to persist for at least another 2 to 3 weeks. What that means, practically, is that even after this next storm system moves through, the setup is going to remain favorable for additional storm development. We are not necessarily done after this one. If you're in the Northeast and you're already mentally done with winter, already thinking about when the shovels go back into storage, the honest answer, based on the current atmospheric setup, is that we may still have a few more significant events to navigate before spring pattern takes hold. The combination of persistent cold air in the north, an active Pacific jet stream feeding energy into the continental United States, and the favorable positioning of the semi-permanent high-pressure systems that have been steering storms up the East Coast is not a combination that disappears quickly. So, what should you actually be doing with this information right now? At this stage, the most important thing is awareness. Not alarm. Awareness. There is a meaningful probability, higher than climatology would suggest for this time of year, that significant winter weather is going to impact a substantial portion of the Northeast over the next several days. That means this is the right time to make sure your winter storm supplies are stocked. It means this is the right time to make sure your vehicle is prepared if you're going to need to drive. It means this is the right time to make sure your snow removal equipment is in working order. And it means paying close attention to the official guidance from the National Weather Service over the next 24 to 48 hours, because the forecast is going to sharpen considerably as we get closer to the event. The models will likely converge on a clearer picture within the next day, and at that point, the conversation around specific snowfall totals, wind speeds, and timing will become much more meaningful. Right now, the smart play is to be prepared for the higher-end outcome while understanding that the actual event may land closer to the middle of the range. That's responsible storm preparation. That's how you approach a situation like this, when the atmospheric data is telling you that the risk is real, but the details are still being resolved. Stay flexible, stay informed, and keep an eye on the sky. When you look at the full picture of what this pattern has delivered over the past several weeks, one thing becomes absolutely clear. We are in the middle of one of the most active winter stretches the Northeast has seen in well over a decade. Storm after storm, back to back, and the setup continues to favor more of the same. This is the kind of pattern that defines a winter season. And if you've been following along, you already know that what we are watching unfold right now is genuinely historic. Stay weather aware, stay prepared, and don't underestimate what's still ahead. Or if this breakdown helped you understand what's coming and gave you something real to work with before the next storm hits, drop a like on this video right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more people find this information when they need it most. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a storm update, a live coverage event, or a breakdown like this one. This community shows up when it matters, and together, we stay ahead of whatever the atmosphere throws at us next.